The Battle of Milne Bay, also known as Operation Re by the Japanese, was a battle of the Pacific campaign of World War II. Elite Japanese naval troops, known as Kaigun Rikuzante, with tank support attacked the Allied airfields at Milne Bay that had been established on the eastern tip of New Guinea. Due to poor intelligence work, the Japanese miscalculated the size of the predominantly Australian garrison and, believing that the airfields were only defended by 2 or 3 companies, initially landed a force roughly equivalent in size to 1 battalion on 25 August 1942. The Allies, forewarned by intelligence from Ultra, had heavily reinforced the garrison, despite suffering a significant setback at the outset, when part of the invasion force had its landing craft destroyed by Allied aircraft as they attempted to land on the coast behind the Australian defenders. The Japanese quickly pushed inland and began their advance towards the airfields. Heavy fighting followed as they encountered the Australian militia troops that formed the first line of defence. These troops were steadily pushed back, but the Australians brought forward elite veteran 2nd Australian Imperial Force units that the Japanese had not expected. Allied air superiority helped tip the balance, providing close support to troops in combat and targeting Japanese logistics. Finding themselves outnumbered, lacking supplies and suffering heavy casualties, the Japanese withdrew their forces, with fighting coming to an end on 7 September 1942. The battle is considered to be the first major battle in which Allied troops decisively defeated Japanese land forces. Although Japanese land forces had experienced local setbacks elsewhere in the Pacific earlier in the war, unlike at Milne Bay, these actions had not forced him to withdraw completely and abandon their strategic objective. As a result of the battle, Allied morale was boosted and Milne Bay was developed into a major Allied base, which was used to mount subsequent operations in the region. Background. Geography. Milne Bay is a sheltered 97-square-mile bay at the eastern tip of the territory of Papua. It is 22 miles long and 10 miles wide, and is deep enough for large ships to enter. The coastal area is flat with good aerial approaches, and therefore suitable for airstrips, although it is intercut by many tributaries of rivers and mangrove swamps. Owing to the swampy lands and high rainfall, about 200 inches per year, the area is prone to malaria and flooding. After floods, the coastal plains become virtually impassable quagmires of glutinous mud, and the ground is not suited for development. The bay is bounded to its north and south by the Stirling Ranges, which at points rise to 3,000–5,000 feet and are covered in Kunai grass and dense scrubland. The main area of firm ground suitable for construction and development is found directly at the head of the bay. In 1942 this area was occupied by plantations of palm oil, coconuts and cocoa, as well as a number of jetties and villages, connected by what was described by Major Sidney Elliott Smith of the Australian New Guinea Administrative Unit as a modest road system that was, in actuality, only a dirt track 10 to 12 meters wide. The area was sparsely populated, although there were a number of villages along the track. Ahioma was situated the farthest east, and together with Gili Gili in the west, it bounded Lilihoa, Wagga Wagga, Goroni, KB Mission, Rabi and Kilabo. Military situation. The Japanese thrust into the Pacific region had begun in early December 1941 with attacks against British and Commonwealth forces in the Battle of Hong Kong and the Malayan Campaign, and against the U.S. Pacific Fleet, much of which was caught at anchor in Pearl Harbor. They rapidly advanced south, overwhelming resistance in Malaya, capturing Singapore in February 1942, and successfully occupying Timor, Rabaul and the Dutch East Indies. While a Japanese naval operation aimed at capturing Port Moresby was defeated in the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, elsewhere American forces in the Philippines capitulated, and Japanese forces advanced towards India through Burma. Although the Japanese had been defeated in the Coral Sea, another attempt at capturing Port Moresby was anticipated. The Allied Supreme Commander of the Southwest Pacific Area, General Douglas MacArthur, decided to establish air bases to protect Port Moresby. To the west, he authorized the construction of an airbase at Maralkin, Netherlands, New Guinea. Another, code-named Boston, was authorized to the east in the largely unexplored Abamullins Harbor area on the 20th of May. Any Japanese force approaching Port Moresby by sea would have to sail past these bases, allowing them to be detected and attacked earlier, but the base in the east had other advantages too. Bombers flying missions to Rabaul and other Japanese bases to the north from there would not have to overfly the Owen-Stanley Range, and would not be subject to the vagaries of the weather and air turbulence over the mountains. The Commander-in-Chief of Allied Land Forces, General Sir Thomas Blamey, selected a garrison for Boston on the 24th of May. The troops were informed that their mission was only to defend against Japanese raids, and in the event of a major attack they would destroy everything of value and withdraw. The Boston project fell through, as a reconnaissance of the area gave an unfavorable report, and Elliot Smith suggested Milne Bay as a more suitable alternative site. A party of 12 Americans and Australians set out to explore Milne Bay in a consolidated PBY Catalina flying boat on the 8th of June. They were impressed by the flat areas, the roads and the jetties, all of which would ease airbase construction. On receipt of a favorable report from the party, MacArthur's general headquarters cancelled Boston on the 11th of June and substituted Milne Bay. Milne Bay was given the code name Fall River. The use of place names as code names proved to be unwise, as some supplies were mistakenly sent to the real Fall River, in Massachusetts. Prelude Allies. The first troops arrived at Milne Bay from Port Moresby in the Dutch KPM ships Karsik and Bonteco, escorted by the sloop HMAS Warrego and the corvette HMAS Ballarat on the 25th of June. Karsik docked at a pontoon wharf made from petrol drums hastily constructed by Papuan workers recruited by ANGAU, who assisted in unloading the ships. The troops included 2.5 companies and a machine gun platoon from the 55th Infantry Battalion of the 14th Infantry Brigade, the 9th Light Anti-Aircraft Battery with 8 Bofors 40mm guns, a platoon of the U.S. 101st Coast Artillery Battalion with 8 5-inch machine guns, and 2 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns of the 23rd Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery. Company of the 46th Engineers of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers arrived on Bonteco with airbase construction equipment. Some 29 KPM ships had escaped to Australia after the fall of the Dutch East Indies. They were manned by Dutch and Javanese crews, and were the lifeline of the garrison at Milne Bay, making roughly 2 out of every 3 voyages there during the campaign, the remainder being by Australian, British and US ships. 5 KPM ships would be lost during the fighting in Papua. Work on the first airfield, which became known as No. 1 airstrip, had commenced on the 8th of June, with Papuan workers under the supervision of ANGAU and US 96th Engineer Separate Battalion personnel clearing the area near Gili Gili. Company of the 46th Engineers began working on it on the 30th of June. In addition to the runway, they had to build camouflage dispersal areas for 32 fighters, taxiways and accommodation for 500 men. To support the air base and the garrison, a platoon was diverted to working on the docks and roads. Although the channels in Milne Bay allow deep draft ships to approach within 40 feet of the shore, they had to be unloaded onto pontoons and the stores manhandled onto vehicles, a labor-intensive process. 3 Kitty Hawks from No. 76 Squadron RAF landed on the airstrip on the 22nd of July, while additional aircraft from No. 76 and also No. 75 Squadron RAF arrived on the 25th of July. They found that only 4,950 by 80 feet of the 6,000 by 100 foot runway was covered with Marsden matting, and that water was frequently over it. Landing aircraft sprayed water about, and sometimes skidded off the runway and became bogged. With No. 1 airstrip operational, work began on 2 more airfields. Some 5,000 coconut trees were removed for No. 2 airstrip, and the site was leveled and graded, but its use first required the construction of at least 2 60-foot bridges, so work moved to No. 3 airstrip near Killaloe. Its construction was undertaken by the 2nd Battalion of the U.S. 43rd Engineers, which arrived on the 4th of August. That day Japanese aircraft began to bomb and strafe Milne Bay, focusing upon attacking the airfields and the engineers as they worked. 4 Zeros and a dive bomber attacked No. 1 airstrip. 1 Kitty Hawk was destroyed on the ground, while a Kitty Hawk from No. 76 Squadron shot down the dive bomber. Following this, the Australians established a workable radar system to provide early warning. On the 11th of August 22 Kitty Hawks intercepted 12 Zeros. Despite their numerical advantage, the Australians lost 3 Kitty Hawks, while claiming 4 Japanese Zeros shot down. On the 11th of July, troops of the 7th Infantry Brigade, under the command of Brigadier John Field, began arriving to bolster the garrison. The brigade consisted of 3 militia battalions from Queensland, the 9th, 25th and 61st Infantry Battalions. They brought with them guns of the 4th Battery of the 101st Anti-Tank Regiment, the 2, 6th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery, and the 2, 9th Light Anti-Aircraft Battery, along with the 1st Australian Engineer Unit, the 24th Field Company. Field assumed command of Milne Force, a task force which exercised operational control over all Allied air, land and naval forces in the area, but only when an attack was imminent. He reported directly to Blamey's Allied land forces in Brisbane rather than New Guinea force in Port Moresby. His most urgent tasks were of an engineering nature. While the American engineers built the airstrips and wharves, the Australians worked on the roads and accommodation. The small force of sappers had to be augmented by infantry and Papuan labourers. Although malaria was known to be endemic in the Milne Bay area, precautions taken against the disease were haphazard. Men wore shorts and kept their sleeves rolled up. Their mosquito-repellent cream was ineffective, quinine was in short supply, and many men arrived without their mosquito nets, which were stowed deep in the ship's holds and took several days to unload. A daily dosage of 10 grains was prescribed, but Field's troop were told not to take their quinine until they had been in the area a week. By this time, many had become infected with the disease. The Director of Medicine at Allied Land Forces Headquarters was Brigadier Neil Hamilton Fairley, an expert on tropical medicine. He visited Port Moresby in June, and was alarmed at the ineffectiveness of the measures being taken to combat the disease, which he realized was capable of destroying the entire Allied force in Papua. He made sure that the 110th Casualty Clearing Station left Brisbane for Milne Bay with a fully equipped pathological laboratory and a large quantity of anti-malarial supplies, including 200,000 quinine tablets. Unfortunately, some equipment was lost or ruined in transit, and the danger from malaria was not yet appreciated at Milne Bay. The 55th Infantry Battalion's companies were already badly afflicted by malaria and other tropical diseases, and were withdrawn and sent back to Port Moresby in early August. But the garrison was further reinforced with 2nd Australian Imperial Force troops of Brigadier George Wotton's 18th Infantry Brigade of the 7th Division, which began arriving on the 12th of August, although it would not be complete until the 21st of August. This veteran brigade, which had fought in the siege of Tobruk earlier in the war, consisted of the 2th, 9th, 2nd, 10th and 2nd, 12th Infantry Battalions. Anti-aircraft and artillery support was provided by the 9th Battery of the 2nd Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment, the U.S. 709th Anti-Aircraft Battery and the 9th Battery of the 5th Field Regiment, while various signals and logistics troops provided further support. With 2 brigades now at Milne Bay, Major General Cyril Claus was appointed to command Milne Force, which was placed under the control of New Guinea Force, now commanded by Lieutenant General Sidney Rowell. On the 12th of August, Claus' headquarters was formed in Sydney at the end of July and was flown up to Milne Bay. He arrived with some of his staff on the 13th of August, but had to wait until the rest arrived before he could formally assume command of Milne Force on the 22nd of August. By this time there were 7,459 Australian and 1,365 U.S. Army personnel at Milne Bay, of whom about 4,500 were infantry. There were also about 600 RAF personnel. Claus assigned the inexperienced 7th Infantry Brigade a defensive role, guarding key points around Milne Bay from seaborne or airborne attack, and kept the veteran 18th Infantry Brigade in reserve, ready to counterattack. Lacking accurate maps and finding that their signals equipment was unreliable in the conditions, the Australian command and control system consisted largely of cable telephones, or where there was not enough line available, runners. The soft ground made movement by road and even on foot difficult. Japanese aircraft soon discovered the Allied presence at Milne Bay, which was appreciated as a clear threat to Japanese plans for another seaborne advance on Port Moresby, starting with a landing at Samurai Island in the China Strait, not far from Milne Bay. On the 31st of July, the commander of the Japanese 17th Army, Lieutenant General Harukiichi Hyakutake, requested that Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's 8th Fleet capture the new Allied base at Milne Bay instead. Mikawa therefore altered his plans for the Samurai operation, and substituted the capture of Milne Bay, which was codenamed Operation Re, and scheduled for the middle of August. Operation Re received a high priority after aircraft from the 25th Air Flotilla discovered the new Milne Bay airfield on the 4th of August, but was then postponed due to the American landings on Guadalcanal on the 7th of August. Under the misconception that the airfields were defended by only 2 or 3 companies of Australian infantry, the initial Japanese assault force consisted of only about 1,250 personnel. The Imperial Japanese Army was unwilling to conduct the operation as it feared that landing barges sent to the area would be attacked by Allied aircraft. Following an argument between Army and Imperial Japanese Navy officers, it was agreed that the Navy would have responsibility for the landing. As a result, the assault force was drawn from the Japanese naval infantry, known as Kaigun Rikuzante. Some 612 naval troops from the 5th Corps Special Naval Landing Force, led by Commander Masajiro Hayashi, were scheduled to land on the east coast near a point identified by the Japanese as Rabi, along with 197 men from the 5th Sasebo SNLF, led by Lieutenant Fujikawa. It was planned that a further 350 personnel from the 10th Naval Landing Force, along with 100 men from the 2nd Air Advance Party, would land via barge on the northern coast of the peninsula at Taupota, in Goodenough Bay, from where it would strike out over the mountains of the Stirlings to attack the Australians from behind. Following the battle, the Chief of Staff of the Japanese Combined Fleet, Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki, assessed that the landing force was not of a high caliber as it contained many 30 to 35-year-old soldiers who were not fully fit and had inferior fighting spirit. Naval support was to be provided by the 18th Cruiser Division under the command of Rear Admiral Mitsuharu Matsuyama. The Japanese enjoyed a significant advantage in the form of light tanks. They also had control of the sea during the night, allowing reinforcement and evacuation. Allied intelligence advantage countering these Japanese tactical advantages. The Allies enjoyed the strategic advantage of possessing superior intelligence about Japanese plans. The Japanese knew very little about Allied forces at Milne Bay, while the Allies received advance warning that the Japanese were planning an invasion. In mid-July, codebreakers under the command of Commander Eric Nave informed MacArthur that towards the end of August the Japanese planned to attack Milne Bay. They provided detailed information about the numbers of soldiers to expect, which units would be involved, the standard of training, and the names of the ships that the Japanese had allocated to the operation. MacArthur's Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, Brigadier General Charles A. Willoughby, had anticipated a Japanese reaction against Milne force, and interpreted the Japanese reconnaissance on the 4th of August as foreshadowing an operation. After Allied naval forces ultra-decrypted a message that disclosed that a Japanese submarine picket line had been established to cover the approaches to Milne Bay, Willoughby predicted that an attack was imminent. In response, MacArthur rushed the 18th Infantry Brigade to Milne Bay. Major General George Kenney, the commander of the Allied Air Forces, ordered air patrols stepped up over the likely Japanese invasion routes. He also ordered preemptive air strikes against the Japanese airfields at Buna on 24 and the 25th of August, which reduced the number of Japanese fighters available to support the attack on Milne Bay to just 6.